journey here, and let's travel about 5 years into the future. That's usually about how far ahead my brain works. So 5 years into the future, when you walked through the door of Brave New Books and you came down those steps to come into here, I want you to imagine that there was a little trash can. I mean, you didn't even notice it as you walked through the doorway. Maybe it was outside on the sidewalk. And as you walked by that trash can, a reader device inside of that trash can did sort of an invisible frisk of you as you walked past. And what it was frisking for was an RFID tag, presumably in your driver's license. Now, if you were too smart for that one and maybe you had a lead-lined wallet, then it would start frisking for other things. How about an RFID tagged credit card? There's over 100 million of those issued in the United States right now, ATM cards and credit cards with RFID in them. If it didn't find that, it would be frisking for an RFID tag, maybe in your Calvin Klein shirt, or maybe in the sole of your tennis shoes, or maybe in your Levi's brand jeans. These are all companies that have been experimenting with the idea of hiding RFID tags in your belongings. And when they did that, at that point then, a record would be made. Well, we know how many people walked into Brave New Books, and we know all the things associated with them. And I'm guessing, I did an experiment a couple years ago when I was leaving to give a speech, and I did sort of an inventory of all the things that I was wearing and carrying that at this future point would have an RFID tag in them. It was about 45 things. I mean, I had my purse with me, I had a comb, I had a lipstick, I had pantyhose on, I had all sorts of things with me and on me. And of those 45 things, most of them were things that I had bought that you could directly associate with me, like my shoes. People usually don't buy you shoes because they've got to fit. Usually you buy your own shoes. My own underwear, certain things that I had bought. But there were some other things on me that would have told even more about me. I had a watch that my mother had given to me for my graduation. That was on my wrist. So now if you scanned it, you'd know that that was bought by her at a particular store at a particular date. So now you know somebody associated with me. I had my husband's winter scarf around my neck, something that he had bought. And scarves are pretty genderless. So I had a scarf around my neck. Now you know who he was. And what was more interesting still was I had a cheap, probably a 49-cent Bic pen tucked into my purse. Well, that 49-cent Bic pen was not mine. I had accidentally stolen it the day before from a reporter who I had had lunch with. So now you know who I've been talking to. So not only do you know who I am, but you know who my extended circle of acquaintances are. And so if you wanted to look at an event like this, which at some point in the future, an event like this may not even be legal any longer. There's certainly precedent for making events where people get together to talk about the corruption on the part of their government and their corporate overlords, and that's become a crime. So one of the reasons why we're guaranteed in the First Amendment of the Constitution the right to assemble and the right to free speech, because that's one of the first things they want to go after. Because when you assemble, there's power in numbers, and when you speak, there's power in the truth. And when you combine those two things, usually things tend to happen. So at that future point, not only would you know who was in this room fighting for liberty or caring about liberty, but you'd know who to go after to start asking questions about you. Or maybe who to go after to start seeing if maybe some of those colleagues or those people whose scarves or pens you're carrying might be willing to become informants or might be willing to watch you in other ways. Or maybe they could be leaned on. So there is definitely a historical precedent for that. The good news today, I am guessing that in this entire room, the only RFID tags on anybody are either on your building access passes. Those of you who work for a corporation have an ID tag, press it up against the wall, right? That's an RFID tag. And probably on your credit cards and your ATM cards. Now, the good news, there is no RFID tag probably at this point in your shoes or sewn into your clothing. And there is no RFID tag, and here's where we need applause. There is no RFID tag in your driver's license. Yeah. Now, I've been working in the trenches on these issues since 1999 when I first founded Caspian. And for those of you who know anything about my history, I got started doing this fighting supermarket frequent shopper cards because something didn't seem right to me about showing a numbered ID card in order to get decent prices on something as basic for life as food. And when I discovered that every time you scan that little, Tom Thumb grocery card or the Albertsons preferred customer card or the Safeway card, that they were making a record of all of your food purchases. Those records in the future are going to come back and bite us in a big way. In fact, there's already plans afoot, and those are things that we can talk about. But that agenda of capturing a database of information about you and about the food that you consume is now expanding to wanting to control the food supply utterly and completely. So I'm kind of coming full circle in a way. It's like I sort of moved away from food surveillance into this whole world of RFID, and now, thanks to the efforts of folks like Judith and others to educate us about the National Animal Identification System, I can tell you that I believe that they are trying to control the food supply utterly. There's a very dangerous and frightening precedent for that in the Soviet Union, where literally tens of millions of people were starved to death through control of their food supply. And it's one of the ways that you can get an unruly and restless population to quickly comply, is you cut them off from being able to obtain food. Now, if they do, how many of you have thought, and I certainly have, that if things get bad enough, I'll just go live in the country. I'll just get off the grid. I'll just go and live in the woods. I'll live under a rock before I will take part in any of this stuff. If it gets that bad, that's what I'll do. Well, I'll tell you this. Let's say you want to go to the country. Well, you got to eat something. And for most of us, eating something means you have a couple of chickens, maybe some eggs, maybe you have a cow, maybe you have some milk, maybe you plant some seeds in the ground. All of those options are being cut off from you. Pay attention to that, because the woods are not going to be an option. The farms are not going to be an option. You know what I just found out? I was doing some research for my appearance last week on Coast to Coast, where I talked about the grid, the frightening power grid that's coming our way. And in the course of doing that research, you know what I discovered? They've even found a way to track all the trees. Yeah, let me tell you this, because it's an interesting story. So there's this senior at MIT, you know, the brain trust for all the engineers. Well, when he was a freshman, he got this question in his head, and it was about something we've long known, that trees give off a slight electric charge. And so he wanted to figure out why that was. So he spent 4 years of his undergraduate education at MIT in engineering trying to figure this puzzle out. So first they thought, well, maybe it's kind of like that, where you put the lemon, you know, in high school you put the lemon and you make a lemon battery or a potato battery. So they tested that wasn't it. And then they tried a whole bunch of other things. And finally, he discovered that the reason trees give off electricity is because their roots have a different pH from the soil, and that slight pH imbalance creates an electrical charge. All right, so for most of us, we go, well, you know, that's very interesting, nice, you know, okay, move on. So he gets this idea, and he says, wow, so trees give off electricity? What can we do with that? Do you know what he came up with? He came up with a device that you can literally hammer into the ground. It's cheap. It makes contact with the roots. It picks up electricity, and what does he want to do with it? Put an RFID tag on every tree. Yeah, so that, and then link them all up, creating a total surveillance grid in the woods. So you think you're going to run away from this by going onto a farm? Forget it. You think you're going to run away from this by going out to the woods? No, because even if you disable 3 or 4 of these things, even if you can find them hammered into the base of a tree in the dirt, this thing is self-repairing. It just goes around the missing nodes in the network. They have a vision, I'm not kidding you, where every physical object, every tree, every bird, every cat, every dog, every person is tagged and tracked 24/7. And they're going to pull it off if we don't stop them. The technologies are there. The only thing standing between us right now and absolute total surveillance, which ultimately will mean absolute total tyranny, is you and me. That's it. There's nothing else stopping these guys. The courts aren't stopping them. The corporations are profiting from it. Do you know what the biggest market last year for RFID was on the globe? You'll love this. It was China. You know why? Because China issued a mandatory national ID card with full tracking capability, RFID tag, to every single person in China. That's over 1 billion people. And the reason why now they're moving on, and see, I saw this coming. Last year, when that contract was completed, big companies, American companies that ought to know better than putting this kind of technology into the hands of the communist government to track their people. Companies like Hewlett-Packard, companies like Dell, like Cisco, like IBM, big companies, right? Our companies, presumably. These companies were wringing their hands and crying over the fact that now their big cash cow had gone away. Now that we've fulfilled the contract, now that we've made the billions, literally billions, you know how much it costs to give to create 1 billion RFID tag driver's licenses or 1 RFID tag national ID cards? A fortune. So these guys made a ton of money off of that. And then they turned around, and I know this because I get all the industry publications. They turned around and said, well, now we're just back to tagging products, and where's the money in that? So you know what they're doing now? They're going after Janet Napolitano. They're going after Obama. They're going after your state legislature. They're going after everybody they can find to say, hey, guess what? 300 million Americans, you need to chip them. You need to put an RFID tag in their driver's licenses.